Alright, so I know a lot of players are getting into combat recently, and with all of the latest balancing updates, there have been some pretty interesting shifts in the overall meta. So today I want to look at all four combat styles and definitively answer the question, what is the best combat style in RuneScape right now? Can anything dethrone ranged? Is Necromancy still the go-to for us mere mortals who don't have PhDs in bulk management? Or maybe it's time for Magic and Melee to finally grab a spot on the podium? Let's find out. So for this video, we're strictly looking at raw damage potential. We're not diving into specific bosses or niche scenarios where one style's toolkit might have an edge over another. I just want to find out, which style has the highest damage ceiling? Plain and simple. So to keep things fair, I ran a couple types of tests using Dwarven Challenge Barrels and Challenge Gems. First up, I did a Revolution only test. I used each style's optimal ability bar as listed on the wiki, and when you're using Revolution, that means you can't be using special attacks, you're not using EOFs, and there's no improvisation. The bar is doing all of the work for you, so it's just a clean, consistent, and highly repeatable baseline. For the three traditional styles, Melee, Ranged, and Magic, I ran both two-handed and dual-wield setups, and then I averaged the results. Then for the second test, I went all out. I did my absolute best with all of the resources available. EOF specs, adrenaline potions, legendary weapon specials, you name it. The aim of this test is to capture the real potential of each style when played well. Of course, a top tier player who's better than myself could squeeze out even more damage, but I still think I'm a really strong player, and I think that combining these two tests will give us a solid overall picture of each style's power level. So here are my numbers, starting with the Revolution test. Necromancy gives us the baseline with 260,000 damage per minute, a strong start. I then looked at Magic, and using the Fracture Staff of Armadyl, I was able to get 256,000 damage per minute strictly using Revolution. When I did switch over to dual wields, that number went up slightly to about 269,000 damage per minute. And I think you can account for that difference given the Wand and Orb passive effect, which powers up your bleeds like Combust and Corruption Blast, as well as has a chance to reset those abilities and let them fire off again. So from a Revolution standpoint, it seems the Wand and Orb are the go-to choice for Magers. Overall though, Mage put out an average of 262,000 damage per minute. Next up I looked at Melee, and with the two-handed Exakill, Revolution put out 224,000 damage per minute. I thought that was a little bit low, especially given the Exakill buff and the direct buff that the Smash ability gets, which is a core part of the Revolution bar. When I switched over to dual wield Melee, that number did go up quite significantly up to 247,000 damage per minute, which again was surprising, but I guess that the Frostblade passive effect might be putting in more work than people give it credit for. That and Destroy is probably just a better single target ability than Hurricane is. So overall for Melee, we put out 236,000 average damage per minute. With Ranged, using the Bow of the Last Guardian, I was able to get 240,000 damage per minute. That number drops off hard when I switched over to dual wields, down to 190,000. But it's easy to see where the fall off happens whenever you're going from a tier 95 weapon all the way down to a tier 92 weapon that also doesn't have any passive effects that increases damage. So overall thoughts on the Revo rankings. With an average damage of 215,000, Range did come in last place. Again, that's largely brought down by the tier 92 dual wields, but even if we were just to look at the Bolg's results, it would have still been in third place, so very near the bottom as a Revolution style. Melee came in third place, slightly overtaking Range, and I think it's still a great style to use Revolution for things like Slayer, but it's probably not the best style to Revo when it comes to things like single target PvM. And now for a very interesting result. We have Necromancy in third place, with Magic just slightly taking the edge as the top damaging Revolution style, 260,000 versus 262,000 damage per minute. So it's really not a big difference there, and that number can definitely fluctuate depending on wand resets on the Corruption Blast ability, but I still thought that that was a really interesting result to see that those two styles are so closely matched in the Revo test. You really can't go wrong with either one of those styles if you're an AFK player. Next up, let's look at the test results from my full manual samples. I did actually end up doing full 5-minute challenge gems instead of Dwarven Barrels. I noticed that soul stacks were not generating at all on Dwarven Barrels, and since souls is such a fundamental part of Necromancy, that would have been shooting it in the foot to test it on barrels. So I did my very best for 5 minutes straight with each style and have some interesting results to share. Just a couple other things to mention with my test: I did not use overloads and I didn't activate any pocket slots like the Grimoire. Just wanted to keep it very flat and very static. So let's start from the bottom and work our way up. In fourth place, we've got Necromancy, with a total damage per minute of 450,000. That might come as a bit of an upset, but yep, It's official, Necromancy is the weakest style at the absolute top end. But because of how accessible, affordable, and well-rounded the toolkit is, Necromancy is still going to be the best option for most players in the game. That said, this result does make one thing clear. If you're willing to put in some effort, other styles can overtake Necromancy. It's still a very strong and very consistent style, but in this test, it's ended up at the bottom. In third place, we've got Magic, clocking in at 468,000 damage per minute. While that might not seem like a massive leap over Necromancy, that's still a big step up. The Fractured Staff of Armadyl buff from a few weeks ago definitely helped. Magic finally feels punchy again, which is nice to see. I can only imagine how this style is going to perform once we get our hands on the Masket robes. If you're a Magic fan, I think we're in for a very promising rest of 2025 and a big 2026. Year of the Wizard. Overall, Magic provides solid damage, super smooth gameplay, and Sunshine rotations absolutely slap, but it just barely trails behind the top two in raw burst damage. Now, this next result actually surprised me at first, but after putting my ego aside and thinking about it for 2 seconds, the results made perfect sense. Second place goes to Ranged, with a total damage per minute of 478,000. Now, I hope that this is a respectable result because this is unquestionably the hardest style to play well. Between managing Bolg stacks, Wen Arrow stacks, Deathspore stacks, it feels like I'm trying to stack Jenga blocks during an earthquake sometimes. Personally, I think I started to struggle a bit with the improvisation required after Death Swiftness. I might have performed better using a more static, spreadsheeted rotation crafted by someone who's a more skilled ranger than I am. That said, Ranged is extremely powerful. It boasts some absolutely colossal special attacks like Saren Godbow, Eldritch Crossbow, Dark Bow, Zamorak Bow, Bolg Spec itself, and it really rewards players who can stay on top of all of that management. But on the flip side, if your execution slips, your damage will too. It's a style where you really get back what you put in. At the highest end, it's absolutely goated, but it's definitely not beginner friendly. I think my results reflect that. A stronger ranged player could probably push this into the top spot, but even so, I think my test still fairly represents ranged position in the meta. It's not doubling the damage per minute of other styles like Reddit says, but it's highly competitive and scales hard with effort and skill. So first place, taking the top spot was Melee, with a whopping 487,000 damage per minute. Melee's always had that raw power, but with the recent Exekill buffs, this style is finally shining. I actually expected Melee to be closer to Magic and maybe even trailing a bit in third position, but the Bonk Sword absolutely delivers. A flat 12% damage boost from Flamebound Rival goes such a long way. Being able to use that buffed smash ability so regularly outside of Berserk and improvise during Berserk with heavy hitters like Dragon Claws, Overpower, or any of Melee's other absurdly strong burst thresholds. All the while playing into the vestments of Havoc's very interesting adrenaline dynamics. Yeah, Melee's no longer in the grave. That's Necromancy's job now. So, closing thoughts. While this test showed clear power spikes, especially from melee and ranged in the top two positions, I thought it was actually really cool that all four styles were relatively close together. I got 450,000 damage per minute at the bottom end with Necromancy, and 487,000 damage at the top end with melee. That's only a 37k spread across the board. Even the Revolution only numbers were fairly close, all kind of hovering in that 230,000 damage per minute ballpark. So despite what you might hear from these newbie Redditors where ranged is doing 2 million DPS per click, it needs to be nerfed. The game's actually pretty well balanced right now. Every combat style is as viable as it's ever been, and every combat style is fun. So at the end of the day, just pick whatever looks cool to you and whatever you think is accessible, and get out there and PVM. If you are looking for any recommendations from an accessibility standpoint, Necromancy is clearly the best place to start. But when it does come time to branch out, you really can't go wrong with either Magic or Melee. Personally, I would lean slightly towards Magic, especially if you're still in that intermediate PVM stage. It's going to offer you a much smoother transition from Necromancy, thanks to gear like Crypt Bloom and defensive tools like Animate Dead, which can help you maintain that tanky and sustained playstyle that you might be used to with the Necromancy Ghost. Melee melee, while powerful, can feel a bit more like a glass cannon style by comparison. The Exekill's Flamebound rival does help offset that to a certain extent, but it doesn't offer quite the same level of survivability that magic does. So if I had to quantify it, I would say I'm 60% in favor of magic, 40% in favor of going melee as your next combat style, and save ranged for last. Once you're really confident and comfortable with high actions per minute, and you think you're ready to make that big push into endgame. One milestone that you might want to aim for before committing to ranged is finishing the elite tier of combat achievements. You can complete 100% of those just by using necromancy, or even magic or melee if you preferred. Ranged isn't really needed for that tier, but once you start diving into the master and grandmaster tiers, that's when it becomes worth investing time into learning range properly. Let me know what you thought of this video, and what combat style is the most fun to you. If you enjoy content like this and want to keep up to date with RuneScape news, combat metas, PVM achievements, Iron Man content, and more, subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.